Hey everybody, welcome to our stay-at-home webinars. Today we're joined by these amazing guys for Between Two Beards. We got Reid Shippen, who's over on my left over here. We got Vance Powell, who's over here, and the amazing Dave Cobb right down here. So I'm gonna turn this over. This is gonna be a weekly show that Vance and Reid are gonna be putting on until we're all out of this mess. And they're gonna have different guests and different kind of ideas for the show. So I'm gonna turn it over to these guys. Have fun, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thanks, Mark. That's super awesome. Hey, welcome to Between the Beards, our new web show with Puremix. I am Reid, Beard 1.
And
Vance. Beard 2. In the next hour, we're going to talk inspiration, motivation, creation, and a little libation with our good friend Dave Cobb, super producer.
Or a lot of libation.
A lot of libation, right. Man, Dave is one of the guys who brought back actually my favorite venue in New York was a place called CBGB's, and that stood for country bluegrass, rhythm and blues. And I think Dave, you brought a lot of that back to the Nashville scene. You've been responsible for some really amazing stuff, and then a little Southern rock and a splash of outlaw, and it's been amazing. So if anyone doesn't know who Dave is, which is crazy, just go ahead and use the Google. We're not going to talk about history here. We're going to jump into some music and some geek shit. Dave, thank you so much for joining us Between the Beards.
I feel like I got the shittiest beard in this whole conversation.
Oh no!
You guys have real beards. I got a Civil War beard. It's
Well, you got
shitty.
you've got something doing. You got words. We want to inspire you forward in your beard growth.
I know. What's the secret?
Growth.
That's really what this conversation's about, is how to grow a damn good beard.
Laziness is the secret.
Yes.
Laziness.
100%. Yeah, I just I don't know about Reid, but I just got tired of shaving my chin.
Well, you're still shaving though, man. I haven't had a haircut in a minute.
Well, I'm actually a little hairy because fuck it. There's nobody. I mean, I ain't seeing anybody, so
Definitely not drinking and driving when you've been at home for 3 weeks.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, yeah, I've drank and drove myself to my bed, but that's pretty much been it.
Well, so we got people all over the world on here. Like Dave, how you doing? Like, how you holding up?
I'm losing it, man. I need people. I need to be around people. I need to be in a room full of musicians. This is entrapment. I don't know what the best word for it is, but drinking doesn't even help anymore. I'm glad to virtually talk to 238 people. So
Awesome.
Yeah,
it's good to have you, man. So we talked a little bit before we got on here about like what song like truly kicked your ass as a producer, as a writer, as a player, as an engineer, and you said
Day in the Life, the Beatles.
Day in the Life by the Beatles. Right.
absolutely my favorite Beatles production song, the
favorite production
thought,
of all
the
time.
concept, the whole thing. Absolutely my favorite.
And that's saying a lot. So, and I think we were saying right before we got on here, like, you still can't figure out how the hell they did that.
Well, the thing about that song, I don't know if people are familiar with it, if you're going to play something or not, but either way, it feels like, it came from outer space. That's what's beautiful about that song. I feel like I've been in a studio long enough to know, how a drum kit's recorded or how a bass is recorded or how vocals go on a track. But that one I listen to and it sounds like it's from another planet. I can't possibly imagine human beings getting together and making that record. That's what's so beautiful about that. I read a thing about Eddie Kramer a long time ago, and some people like to make it sound like a band in the room, and he said something to the fact that he likes to make it sound like a band in outer space. And I think that song very much has that. I cannot put all the pieces together to make that song make sense. I listen to it, and I'm a novice still to this day when I listen to that song, even though I've heard it a million times, and like I said, I've been in the studio a lot. I still can't imagine how it was put together.
So you're saying you learn something every time you hear that?
Well, I mean, I think it's, there's so many recording techniques in that, I mean, you've got John playing acoustic and you've got this feedback tape slap that makes it sound, like it's from outer space. And then you have this gigantic, crescendo of a string section, which is, the time signature breaks. And what's beautiful about that in a day of modern record making where everyone's using clicks, that's symphonic, that the tempo ebbs and flows. And it's like watching a conductor conduct a song. I mean, it starts off slow and then it builds fast, and then it builds faster crescendos, and then it's double time. and then it goes back into a slower thing. You couldn't possibly do that, or at least maybe you could on a click. And that's why I like that. It's treating rock music like orchestra. And I think that's what's beautiful about that song, you know?
Well,
Hey Dave, have you heard the multi tracks of that have been floating around?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah,
and it still
interesting.
doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, the Beatles book goes on to how they bounce and how they cut this and that.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is you really can't hear it in the stereo mix. But if you've ever heard the 5-1 that's on the Cirque du Soleil production, you can hear Mal Evans counting bars.
Yeah, heard that.
You can hear him counting bars during the string section. It's really pretty impressive and cool.
Still, just imagine them in the session. Like, okay, I've got this song. It goes like this. And then right here, we're going to cut to this gigantic crescendo string thing. And then we're going to go double time. And then we're going to go back to this big outro. It's such a unique production in a lot of ways and experimental. And maybe before Sgt. Pepper and Revolver, people had to go for 2 minutes and 30-second singles. And this wasn't that. But every single part, if you listen to Ringo's drum fills, ba-boom, ba-doom, they're musical, they're lyrical, and everything about that song is lyrical. And even recording Geekdom, I couldn't understand the vocal sound that Paul McCartney has when he comes in on the woke up, fell out of bed part. You hear it, and it took me about 20 years to realize that's proximity effect. It's like you really hear him on that mic, and there's so many.
And John on the breathing, on the heavy breathing.
Yeah, so many things, man, so many things, and that. The way they throw the reverbs and delays on the outro vocals, it's amazing. I've heard the multi-track, and they're on one mic doing that, the harmonies, everything. They're on one mic. It's really something that, God, I don't know if anybody's pulled off something that magical since,
One of the high points of my entire life was at Blackbird one year, we played Day in the Life for Jeff Emmerich, who in the 5-1, who had said, I've never heard it. And he was like, oh, they're missing the piano ride here, and they're missing this and that. And then when it got to the very end, he said something really interesting. He said, that other sound in there, that's not a rattle on the piano. That's George playing harmonium.
No kidding. Wow.
George playing harmonium. The Beatles, Day in the Life, Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah, it's a definite.
Unbelievable.
Just the bass sound on that too, right? That's one of the first times people overdub bass on a record, and you hear it. You hear the room on the bass sound on that. It's everything about that is magical, just magical production.
I'm impressed that it's like 2 or 3 songs. Cheers, fucker.
Yeah.
Cheers, fuckers.
We virtually toast. Is that possible? There you go. Boom.
It's like 2 or 3 songs, and it's and then you go to the end, and then you get 20 seconds of silence, and then you get a loop. There's like hip hop in this thing. Like, it's crazy.
Totally.
Yeah, the lock groove, the famous lock groove.
Shit, I've probably stolen half my career from that one song.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask. Like, how did that change the way you approach stuff? What inspiration did it give you actually in the studio? Have you ever said, man, you know what? I know exactly what we're going to do, and it came from an inspiration on that?
Oh, 1,000,000 times over. I mean, there are things, the reverse stuff in particular I've used on lots of records. The phasing and flanging, it's all stolen from the Beatles, that stuff. Maybe Itchy Park was the first time they used flanging with the small faces, but that era of recording and that style, it still inspires me, no matter if I'm making, a commercial country record or a rock and roll record or a pop record. I'm still stealing from that same template. I mean, I think that's in the back of my head when I'm hearing, a country song. I'm hearing the Beatles. I'm hearing the Stones. I'm hearing that era of recording. I think that to me, I remember being a kid and starting to mess around with 4-tracks, and you say, oh, you get a 4-track. The Beatles were done on a 4-track, but I don't think you can do it on a little 4-track that we had in the 80s learning on. It was so inspiring to try, but I don't think we ever got close. But I still think about humans playing together when I make records. I still think about, people singing live as they do the track down. I don't think you can get a great, listen, for me, a lot of people make great records where they've recorded the vocal later, but something happens when a singer is singing with the band. When the singer gets loud, the band gets loud. When the singer gets quiet, the band gets quiet. And that to me is what's beautiful about that song and that era of record making. It's just humans interacting. The ebb and flow, it's the tension, it's the mistake. And that's what, still to this day, when I go in to make any record, I'm still trying to go after that feel. Not necessarily copy a day in the life, but, copy the essence of humanity, So.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. 100%. So I got a question for you, Dave.
Yeah.
So this is a tough one. Who do you make records for? I mean, do you make it
for the
yourself?
artist? For the artist.
You make them for the artist? You make them for the
artist.
fans? You make them for A&R?
For the artist, really. I mean, for the artist and myself. And I think, the best records I've ever made are the ones where it's kind of insular and we just go in and we make the record and we just try to make each other happy. We just try to leave the room. I mean, Vance, you and I have worked together quite a bit. And, we can talk about Chris Stapleton. Vance and I've done a few Chris Stapleton records together, and we'll do a song and we'll come and listen in the control room. And if it feels good, that's it. That's the end of the thought. There is no more premeditated things going on. If we're happy, that's what the public gets to hear. And I think that's what people like to hear, is something that you feel like is the best representation of, what you wanted to go for. So I'm always trying to make records for who's ever in the room. If we feel it, because I think maybe the artist a lot of times is they scrutinize things the most. They get the most myopic on every detail and police themselves the most. But so if we pass that test, then maybe it passed the test to the listener,
Right. Absolutely.
So is it a challenge to get the artist to see past them hyper focusing and see the forest?
For sure. I mean, there's been many a times. There's a song called Jordan by this band Rival Sons, and the singer for that band, Jay Buchanan, is just a monster singer. Vance actually mixed that song. Just a monster singer.
Amazing singer. Amazing.
So
all those guys are great.
Great band.
Such a good band. And the vocal pass is him playing acoustic and going down live. And he intended it just to be kind of a guide vocal, and we were going to, come back and replace it. And when we got done, I was like, no, man, that's it. That's the vocal. And he's one of my best friends, so I can talk shit about him. But he's like, no, I got to do it again. I was like, no. He's like, dude, fuck you. I got to do it again. So we did it again and again and again and again. And after about 3 takes, he's like, okay, you're right. And that's the one on the record. And I think so. Sometimes people have so much technical ability, they know they can do something better, but maybe they're not, heart-wise going to be able to do it better. Something happens on that initial, you got about 3 takes to get a song, I think, a lot of times. And then it just gets premeditated. And as Vance knows, sometimes in the studio, we'll do 2 or 3 takes. And if it's getting hard, we'll just take a break from it, come back and hit it another time. I think you lose it after you take and take and take and take again. And what you notice when you do multiple takes is it just gets faster and faster and more aggressive and more aggressive. And if you take a break and come back, usually you'll get it right away again. So I'm always trying to get first takes and stop the artist from overthinking everything.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've kind of always found also that it's the same sort of way if you make a change in the song. Like if the bridge gets longer or shorter, the first time they play it, it'll be fucked up. The second time will be probably pretty close to right. The third one's usually great. And by the fourth one, everybody's thinking, why did we change this? So it's kind of one of those things, like sometimes it's depending on which way you go. So
there are tricks that I do sometimes. I'm definitely not a producer who, kind of shows up and goes, this is great, let's just capture it. I always get my hands pretty deeply involved with, arrangement and parts and things like that. But sometimes when a band is rehearsed to go in a studio, or they've been playing a song for a year, before I even get into things, I'll have them just cut it right away, the way they have it. Even though I know I'm going to change something, I have them cut it because they're not thinking. And then you get these parts that are magical. And then you may, write this new bridge, or you may have a theme or something you put into it, or change the chorus. Then you can cut that and then splice it into the original. So you're always getting that first take feel. And my whole goal in being in the studio is not to overthink things. It's always trying to feel overthinking. And so after what I do is try to get the feel before we go into the thinking,
Right. That's great. All right, Dave, here's another good question.
All right.
As fast as possible, name 3 records you can't live without. Speed round.
They're all Beatles. It'd be Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, and maybe Sticky Fingers by the Stones.
I was going to say, yeah.
I have to give one Stones record in there.
Yeah. That's a tough one. Beggar's Banquet, Revolver, Sticky Fingers.
Yeah, Sticky Fingers is it, man. Can you hear me knock? Can you
yeah, man.
Yeah, that song, man.
And I love Sgt. Pepper's. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's definitely number 4. But yeah, Yeah.
Well, you've seen the invoice from the studio on some of that Stone stuff where it was like, boom, here's like the 4 songs we cut in one day. You know, it costs $160 and we're done.
Yeah, Muscle Shoals sound. Yeah.
What about you, Reid? Come on, 3.
Man, okay. Songs in the Key of Life, Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, and Revolver.
Yeah, Kind of Blue, man. We had dinner the other night. And it was just, it's just us at home, and I put Kind of Blue on. I put the extra with the extra takes, and it was just so amazing. And my wife loves music. She's not really a music fan, and I put it on. She goes, "Oh, Kind of Blue, Miles Davis." I was like,
Desert Island, right? I could listen to that record forever and ever. And speaking of Desert Island, so Dave, like other than a generator, what would your Desert Island gear be? Like if you had to only have a couple of things.
A couple or a handful? Because a couple.
2 mics, 2 compressors, 2 preamps.
Okay, Cole's 4038, an SM7. Wade from Chandler has been making these killer new pre's, the Red 47s and his TG stuff. I would go with that, and compressor-wise, 1176s. Yeah. But Spectra too. I like both of them. It's hard. I can't. Maybe one Spectra 610 and one 1176.
Man, I've really been loving those Spectra, the new Spectra 500.
Insanity.
Really great. Really fantastic.
Everything they make is killer. The Spectrasonic stuff sounds amazing. The consoles were great too. It's incredible.
Bill Cheney, everybody.
Yeah, Bill Cheney.
Hey, Bill.
All right, Dave, here's one for you. What's your biggest mistake?
Or your favorite mistake?
Probably, what?
Favorite mistake, not biggest, because
I got a biggest mistake for you. This probably translates to other people. When I was a kid, I think I grew up in the era where before me, you had an apprenticeship in studios. You go to a major studio, you clean it, and then all of a sudden you were looking in on the sessions. You were assistant, then you were engineer. I grew up in a time where that wasn't the big thing because major studios were kind of declining. So I read a lot of stuff in books, and I remember reading tons of recording books, and they said, this is how you have to mic something. You have to put 15 mics in the drum set. This is how you have to EQ the kick drum. This is how you have to EQ the snare drum. This is how you compress. And I read that stuff, and it was like reading another language. I couldn't understand it, but I tried to copy it. And it took me about 10 years of making records to realize that I probably only need an overhead and a kick drum mic to get the sound that I was looking for. And I probably don't need EQ on that. I probably don't need all the compressors that I was told to put on things. I really learned after a lot of years how to do things simply, and that's the sound that I was looking for. When we were talking about Jeff Emmerich, the Beatles engineer earlier, I remember reading really dorky questions about Jeff Emmerich, and they said he used a RS-124 on, the drum. He'd pair them all down, and then he'd go a Fairchild 660 on the kick drum, right? And I'd heard this from other sources and supposedly read about it. And I asked him, I was like, Jeff, how did you record drums on Beatle albums? The early stuff, particularly Revolver. And he said, one would think that drums were one track at that point. I was like, yeah, sure. And he's like, one would think I'd use one compressor. I'm like, okay. He's like, I use a 660. That's it. One compressor. You take all the drum mics, whether it be 3, 4, 5 mics, put it through one compressor to tape. And when I started working with Vance a few years ago, and I remember Vance we'd done things together where he just went to one drum track. And it was a sound that I'd been chasing for a long time. And I'd read all these books. You have to have all these options and these compressed room mics in the back and this and that and this parallel here. And Vance just goes, let's do the whole thing on 8-track. I'm going to have drums on channel 1 and they'll be mono. And it worked. And that was a sound. It sounds as big, if not bigger, than the multi-mic thing. So I think my biggest mistake is listening to other people about making records and not trying things and experimenting and simplifying. And that took me a lot of years of record making to simplify, So
that's great.
It's a great thing to be able to be working with an artist that's willing to allow you to march down that path, or a producer either way. The thing that I loved about doing one track or doing just like very minimal drum tracks is that no one ever asks for the hi-hat to be louder, because you just look at them and go, okay. And you turn the 10K up and you're like, is that it? Will that work? And everybody goes, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that's it. So it's kind of a nice way to just kind of make it happen, and then you can concentrate on other things.
The same thing with the low end.
The rhythm track's great. You can concentrate. Yeah.
The same thing with low end. You need more kick drum. Turn up the low frequency on the EQ.
I mixed. There's a song on Blunderbuss where I had the snare when I cut it. I just didn't get the snare loud enough, so it was literally like the whole song. I just wrote automation on every snare hit. It was like, boom, bap, boom, bap. Just turning it up a couple dB every time the snare happened. And I'd rewind, and I just did it through the whole song, and then it was done. Like, okay, well, that was easy. So yeah,
it's amazing. People talk about old records all the time. When you really analyze a lot of old records, the snare drum may sound like a cardboard box, and it's what make the mix work. Sometimes I'm guilty. If I'm mixing something, I'll get too focused on the snare drum. So if I'm mixing something in the last few years, I just put it up and concentrate on the vocal first, and then I don't try to get detailed with things, because I don't think Jeff Emmerich, the same conversation. I'm sorry, I'm wearing that conversation out, because him and Glenn Jones are my heroes, and I think they're the best engineers that ever walked the planet. When they were doing stuff, he said something that was really smart. He said, I think of mixing like a photograph. Not everything can be in focus. And when he said that, I'm like, oh my God, why haven't I heard this 20 years ago? It would have made
that's amazing.
Way simpler. What a brilliant comment, because your ethereal guitar part is probably not as important as the vocals, so that can be put off somewhere, and you feel it, maybe not hear it, and maybe your snare drum isn't the most important thing in the song. I think when I first started reading these books, like we were talking about earlier, the kick and snare always seemed to be the thing, but I think people respond to vocals more, and I think if the vocal's shining, it's hard to mess a mix up, because you've got that doing the thing it's supposed to do.
So if you could jump back to tell your 20-year-old self something, what you're saying is, like, just go for what sounds good to you and commit to it.
Yeah, commitment, because I think they had to on those old records, and we have the ability to mess around, and it just gets all confusing after you spend too much time on something, I think.
So just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
My motto. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, hard no.
Hard no.
Hey, let's take a minute here and talk about what we're drinking. And I would let's give a shout out and a toast to the great Jeff Emmerich. I was lucky enough. I think Dave too was lucky enough to meet him, and he was a really swell, really sweet man. So, Jeff, we need you.
Yeah, absolutely amazing human being. Love the guy.
Oh, yeah, incredible.
What's everybody drinking?
Casamigos.
Yes, Dave.
Doing the same. Casamigos.
Yes, I love that. I actually am having. Let me get him. I'm having Greenbrier, Tennessee whiskey.
Well played. Hysterical.
Well played.
All right, I have to ask. You guys probably know this. The snare on Day in the Life is my perfect snare sound. Which,
and the
what is it? Is it D19 overhead?
Beatle, yeah, probably Revolver. It may have been that for sure. But yeah. I think it's just the sound, the tuning of that snare. I think tuning seems to be and it's Ringo. I have a funny Ringo story. I actually got to perform with Ringo about a year and a half ago, and I was so petrified because Beatles are my favorite band, and I adore the guy. He's my favorite drummer of all time. So I was with the artist Chris Stapleton. We all got to go back and spend a second with him, and we went to go shake his hand, and I go like this to shake his hand, and he grabs this right here. And all I could think, I'm having a Larry David moment. I love Curb Your Enthusiasm. I'm having this big Larry David moment, like, oh my God, I met my hero, and I missed his hand. That's all I can think about. Oh my God, I missed Ringo's hand. I'm meeting a Beatle, and I missed Ringo's hand. And so I'm going Larry David in my mind. I'm like, you got to tell me about the handshake, Ringo. He goes, well, it's because people have pneumonia on the fingers. That's what he said. So he doesn't shake anybody's hand.
Wow.
But anyway. Yeah, pneumonia in the fingers. He's like, I tried this. The kids do this, and I can't figure it out. So he does like a Viking handshake. But Ringo had the tuning. I don't know whether he or Mal Evans tuned his kit, but it's the perfect snare. And I feel like that record has a lot of bottom snare to it too.
Yeah.
Beatle albums seem, they may not have, they probably didn't have a top snare mic, but it was definitely
And one above it, yeah.
and a lot of bottom snare mixed in there. And then that Fairchild in Abbey Road Studio 2, you hear the room, just the tom sounds as big as a house on that.
It's so massive.
So massive. So explosive. And that's what, honestly, we're going back to simplicity. I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like, going through one compressor. Everything's reacting together. The kick is reacting with the snare and toms and the cymbals, and you can't really get that when you start individually spreading things out. And I think that's what's so beautiful about that record.
Yeah,
that's great. That's amazing.
Yeah. All right, Dave, here's one more question for you.
All right.
Why did you get into this? Now, I know, first of all, everybody knows you're a guitar player. I don't know if everybody knows it, but was it chicks? Was it a way to get
No. I didn't get into it. I didn't get into it for the Kiss reasons. I got into music because I had no other interest. I mean, I think since, first memory, I remember hearing, I had an aunt who came to stay with us for a little while, and I grew up Pentecostal and super Christian kind of background with not a lot of secular records, and she bought New Kid in Town single 45 by the Eagles, and I heard those harmonies on that, and I'm like, what is that? And, I was probably 4 or 5 years old, so I don't remember not being obsessed with music. And I always thought I wanted to be in a band and tour, and I did all that, and I got signed when I was young and did a lot of session stuff, and was a session musician for a long time. But I met my wife, Lydia, and when I met her, I just wanted to stay home. It was the weirdest feeling. I never really enjoyed the road. So the moment I started producing friends' bands and they got record deals, I realized, wait a minute, I can go in the studio and be in a different band all the time, and I can go sleep in my own bed at night. That's when I decided to be a producer. And I think, and I said this before on other things, but I think being a producer, is really lying. It's like, who says, oh, he's a producer? I think you just lie one day and start doing it and try to get better at it. So I started a career off in lying and staying at home. And that's really my impetus for being a producer, is being able to say I can do it and sleep in
and
my
now
bed.
we're right back to staying at home.
Yeah, literally. Now I kind of wish I was on the road a little bit, So
yeah, I was going to say, Vance, you saw that question. Somebody said, who's responsible for the kick drum on Chris Stapleton's Millionaire?
And Derek Mixon.
Yeah, Derek Mixon. I mean, he's the one who played it. He's responsible for it. I just recorded it.
And Derek, that goes to a good conversation. That goes back to tuning too. Derek, the drummer for Chris, is a really great drum tuner.
Yes.
He's really, really got it dialed. So when Vance mics it up, he's got a good kind of start to things, getting everything together, because the guy is a great tuning, great at tuning. And that's something that I think, being in a studio for a long time, you really learn it's the drummer and the tuning more than anything, really. And then you can
and the balance.
And the balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you look at a drum kit, obviously, if you're doing it on 1 or 2 tracks, you're looking at the entire kit as an instrument, where sometimes a lot of people look at the individual pieces of the kit as different instruments.
That would probably be more of a Vance answer. You want to answer that, Vance?
I think that, here's what I would say. All of this, everything is subjective. It depending on the band and the drummer, you can get away. If you've got the right drummer, I mean, you can put one mic up. I mean, it's the ultimate in perfect phase.
Yeah.
And you put it up, and it's in a good room, and the mics are tuned up and sounds great. One mic will kick your ass.
That's true. That's very true.
The problem is, very few bands have that guy. There are some, but very few. There aren't a lot of Ringos out there. There's a lot of guys who play great, but there's a lot of guys too who overplay the weight of the hat with the snare drum, or every drum is played like it's like people think John Bonham hit hard. Yeah, no, he didn't. He didn't hit hard. Listen to his drums. Now, I believe he hit his kick drum hard because that's what it sounds like, but it doesn't sound to me like he's hitting the toms hard. It sounds to me like they're tuned really nice and open, very jazz, tuned to notes, and nobody really does that. Drummers like drums. A lot of drummers like drums tuned down, so they have all this weight. It's hard to get all that shit through the mud. You know, it's hard to do.
You know, I heard a story about John Bonham. It said that John Bonham early on, you know, when he was the first couple records, he would listen to the first pass that they cut, and then he'd go back and they cut it again. And when he listened to how hard he was hitting cymbals and how hard he was hitting things. So the next pass hit it lighter. So he knew that hitting the cymbals light would make the drums get bigger. So he was very conscious of that. That's exactly what you're talking about. So yeah,
I think that there are drummers that I've recorded that they have no fucking clue what they're playing. They just play as hard as possible. And at that point, it's like, you know, you just try your best to make it sound great. But
what I like to say is there are drummers and there are drum owners.
Yeah. Well, there are drum players and there's drummers. I'm a drum owner, but I'm not a player. You know what I mean? I'm not even a drummer. I'm not even a player. I'm just an owner. But yeah, there are guys who own drums and there are guys who play at drums, if you know what I mean.
You know, it's interesting. You're talking about drums. I think drums is one of those things, and I know both of you guys are guilty of this. I think being an engineer, you need to have drums. You need to have your safety drums. When you walk into a session, you don't know what you're going to get. You know, a lot of people get off the road as their touring kit. The heads haven't been changed and God knows when, or they have huge dents in them or whatever. I think it's really important to have drums. Drums almost over a mic preamp in a lot of ways. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Have them there, know how to tune them, or know somebody who knows how to tune them, and have a good jump on the session. You know, so
absolutely. All right, cool. We got a couple more little questions here for you. You ready for this one?
Oh yeah.
What's your superpower, and what's your kryptonite?
My superpower is funny because somebody's artist I work with, Jason Isbell, said something earlier. He said that I'm really good at dodging throwing stars from ninjas. It's like I think my superpower is being able to read the room and know when things are getting tense and try to diffuse it. I think that's more of a superpower than, you know, having a great console. And I do. When I walk in a room, I have to read the room every single time. One thing I think they mess up in recording programs a lot is they teach you how to mic stuff, they teach you how to mix stuff, but they don't teach you how to hang. So I think hang 101 is the beginning of everything. And knowing that you're in a room of people, that everyone's fragile and everyone's, you know, feels self-conscious and everyone, you know, wants you to notice what they're doing. You have to be able to pacify everybody. So I think maybe that's my superpower, is trying to understand the psychology of the room. My kryptonite is food. I'm low blood sugar, and if I start getting hungry, I start getting snappy and mean as hell. So I have to make sure. Actually, you know what? As a superpower, I'm really good at ordering food too, knowing when to order. I can look at people.
I will say that Dave Cobb sessions we are well fed.
Yeah, we're chubby as hell. Yeah,
I think that Dave like his schedule for food.
It's pretty much every 3 hours.
I'm a little more like a bear, you know, like I can eat in the morning, you eat at night, and I'm okay. Dave's like every 4 hours. Oh yeah, I'm your bear, brother. Every 4 hours, Dave's like, man, what's for dinner? What's for lunch? Or man, we should order cookies. You know, like,
we actually had one record Vance and I were doing. We actually had a dessert off between chain restaurants, Waffle House and Shoney's, and ordered in the pies and just made that. And we were all excited about getting the song done. Let's go try fucking pies. So
yeah,
you know, a lot of stupid shit like that. You know,
deliver cookie deliveries. Yeah,
exactly.
I filled this screen because of that. You know
Dave, you brought up something that I like to ask a lot of people who are in the creative arts, and it's about imposter syndrome. It's about self-doubt. How often that you feel like, man, you know what? Sooner or later, someone's going to look at me and be like, you have no idea what you're doing. Why are you here? Kind of thing. Can you talk about that a little bit for the people who are like, you know, like new to this?
I think it's a scary thing when you work with any artist at any level to walk in the room and they have a song that they love. They love every single part of the song. And you're the one who says, well, maybe try this melody here. Maybe try, let's add a chorus. The chorus isn't right. Let's work on the chorus for a little bit. That's a daunting task, and it takes a lot of nerve to tell somebody that their art isn't perfect. and that's something I've always kind of just gone for, and it usually works out, and it usually winds up, you know, driving the song to a better place. But I can't tell you that I don't. Every night before I start a record, I don't sleep. The first night of an album, right before it, I don't sleep. I'm up all night. The gears are churning. I think I have to do some kind of premeditated homework, on thinking about parts, and I'll come up with something and I'll sing into my phone really quick. So for the next day, I have some kind of ammunition. But I'm scared to death every single record that I'm walking in and people are going to be like, "Why are we paying this guy money?" So, and
that never goes away, right?
It never goes away. It never goes away. It's almost like going on stage. I think no matter how many years you've performed live, when you walk on stage, you get butterflies waiting on going on stage. So I feel this is the same in the studio. I get butterflies waiting to start the first day session because you don't know anybody. You don't know the room. And there's always, every band has different characters, and trying to figure out the characters in the band really quick and the personalities is very difficult. And it's something I still learn. I feel like every session and every record I make, I'll learn something new. I by far don't know everything. I'm far from knowing it. And the same with engineering too. I feel like every record I learn something new. A lot of times, you just have to read the room and read the vibe and figure out how you can assert yourself and make it all work for everybody.
Do you write down when you do stuff? Do you write down like, oh my gosh, that was great, I'm gonna like write it in a journal or something so you remember?
No, I don't. And I'm actually, for the most part, I hate pre-production. I think it's evil. I think people spend the best energy making pre-production on records. I think bands will go into I never did it, and I never wanted to do it because I was in bands and did pre-production with producers. And I remember you work out this great bass part, the great guitar line, and by the time you get in the studio, you're on to something else. You're not excited about that anymore, or you forget that line. So you've missed inspiration. So I'm a big proponent of send me a demo on the iPhone with an acoustic guitar, and let's go in the studio and make this up together. Because I think you miss your excitement about a song after you've belabored over it for a long time. So I'm a big proponent of save it till we get in the studio. Let's let it all out.
Agreed.
And we go back to Beatles, and that seems to be the topic of the day. But the Beatles, you have all these anthologies because they kind of did that. They're like, okay, we need a single by June 1st. Let's go in the studio, and they had a rough outline of a song, and you can hear them work it until it becomes, She Loves You or whatever. You hear take after take after take, and that's the way I make records still to this day. Is like, let's get a basic idea of the song, let's go in, and we'll record from second one. So if we get that chorus on the first time we've done it, the best, we'll splice that into the final arrangement. So tape is rolling all the time, and it becomes
ABC, always be cutting.
Yeah, and it becomes like, when you were a kid, being in a band, being in a garage, you're woodshedding, but it happens to be on tape, and at the end of it all, you can take the best bits of that whole experiment and put it together, and that's how you get a good master, I think.
You see that question that just came in? That's a good question. What do you do when an artist is well known and they come in with a shit song?
Smile.
I think if they have a bad song, I'll go, what about that other song? And I'll keep delaying that until that's kind of like, okay, should we cut this song? And then maybe we even cut it just to kind of keep the vibe happening. And we try to really improve it. I mean, we try to take a song that may not be great. There are hard things that happen in the studio. And I'm saying this because she said this in public. This artist, Brandi Carlile, I work with, he's one of my favorite artists. I'm such a massive fan of hers, and she's one of the best singers on the planet.
So good.
We did her last record, and she had incredible songs coming into it, but I didn't feel like she had the song that was going to change things or going to make everything kind of, or kind of the song that was going to change destiny a little bit. So I talked to her, I had this really difficult conversation, and I told her, I was like, hey, I feel like we're missing that song that really shows what you're capable of vocally, because I know her strength, lyrics, but also her vocal strength. And I was like, we don't really have a song that showcases what you're capable of. And I said, you don't have a song that I feel like goes there since The Story, which is on the first record. And she looked at me just kind of sideways, and it was a really hard conversation to have. And then I sat down, I played her Elvis the Trilogy. If you guys have never heard that song, go listen to Elvis the Trilogy. It's magical. Every single emotion gets milked on that song, from high highs to low lows, to sadness, to joyous, triumphant celebration. And I played her this song, and we picked up guitars. We kind of started working on something. And the next day she finished it, and it was this song called The Joke. And she told me later, I didn't know how mad she was until later. She said, I went home to my wife, Catherine, and I said, Catherine, Dave Cobb said I didn't have a song as good as The Story. And her wife is really amazing. And she said, just like, honey, let's be honest. He may be right about that. And then it's won Song of the Year, the Grammys. So. And we're tight and everything's good, but that was a difficult conversation to have. But I feel like I would be cheating an artist if I took their money and I went in the studio and didn't say my opinion. Not necessarily that I'm right or wrong or anything, but I think it's my to say my opinion. Always. It's always my job to say what I'm thinking, and that pisses people off sometimes. But I think in that process of saying something really hard, I think you have to kind of get a rapport with somebody first before you can just go, So.
I would throw in one thing too. This is.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm drunk as hell. Are you guys drunk now? I've been drinking tequila the whole time.
I'm gonna pour some more. I would say that one of the things that happens is at some point, and Dave, please take this. We work, the self-doubt questions. You work for a long time with the scale tilted towards fear of being fired, fear of losing the gig, because you have X amount of product behind your belt and what you've done. And then at some point, that whole thing sort of tilts. And on the other side of it is, it's like, look, if you get fired from the gig, it wasn't the right gig, or okay, cool. You got fired because you said the thing that needed to be said. The artist wasn't ready to hear it, and you got your ass fired. Fine. I can walk away cool with that. But at some point, I know a lot of people who are on the forum here, it's a constant struggle. How far do I push the artist? Do I push the artist over the edge and see if they catch themselves? Or do I stop myself from that last push? It's always a tough one for me. And I know that after a little while, like I think I've kind of got to the point with mixing and producing to some degree where it's kind of like, okay, cool. If you don't like it, great. Awesome. Thanks. See you guys later. I don't really care about it, but it's hard early on to lose those gigs.
What I like to say,
like you're right.
if you're not getting fired on occasion, you're not trying hard enough.
We've all been fired. Yeah. We've all been fired. Yeah.
And I do know that, like, at least for me, all of the best records, the ones I'm most proud of, when people ask you, like, what's your favorite record? It's the ones where everybody showed up to make the best possible music. And it wasn't about ego, and it wasn't about power. It was about, everyone's here. Everyone's great. Let's make amazing music.
To add to that, I think the best musicians and best singers and artists I've ever worked with walk into a session with no ego. It's the ones that are not very good that walk in.
That's a fact.
That's true. Yeah.
Every time.
The better they are, the less ego they have.
No ego. The best artists, best singers I've ever worked with, no ego. Best drummers I've ever worked with, no ego.
Which they do have an ego. They just don't let it trump the music.
Right.
Yeah. It's not. It becomes less important than the final production, the final thing. I mean, I think we've all had that. We've had to deal, especially with bands. Now that's the key here. If you're working with bands, somebody in the band doesn't like it, and suddenly you're as a producer, you're in the middle of this 5-way marriage, in the band. And that's harder than if it's a single artist, but.
That's a funny observation, because this band Rival Sons I made a bunch of records with. The drummer, every time it's the take or it's the right, we've got the magic. He hates it every single time. He's always like, nah, one more, and we're like, no, dude, that's it. And every time that's been one of those songs, it's been the single. That's worked out really well for him every time. So now we joke about it. We know it's a litmus. Like, oh, you hate that one? That's the one we're using every time. So
it's funny
into humor,
It's funny that you say that, because Pines, hey Pines, what up, baby?
Pines,
just asked a great question. Is there a record, if you could go back and redo a record, which one?
If I said that, I would. That's the jumping on a hand grenade, dude. Nah, hell no. Well, none of us in this whole forum. Reid, why don't you answer that question?
Okay, you know what? There is one, and it was 100 years ago. It was this band called Plum, and every time I hear this one song, every time I hear this one song, I'm like, oh man, you know what? That guitar was always too loud. It always bugged me. I should have turned it down. It bugs me every time I hear it.
And there's someone probably that loves that record because the guitar is so loud.
Probably, yep. And that's what's beautiful about it.
Oh, there you go. Tennessee whiskey again. Well played. Yeah, that's such a hand grenade of a question. That's something that no one should ever answer.
You know what my answer is to that? My answer is all of them. That's my my thing. For the first 6 months, I hate everything. I hate it. It's terrible. I'm the worst. I can't even imagine it. I need to go back to just dropping fries, working at the
dropping
the Walmart, dropping fries. Like my future is at Walmart.
We need to all three make that single together, dropping fries. That's what we're going to be doing if this shit doesn't.
That's my gig. And then like a year later, I hear it and I go, yeah, because all of the underlying, I know this is going to sound weird, but like all the algae's been cleaned out, all the moss has been moved out of the way, and all the stuff banging around my head about how whatever is gone, So
hey, that's what's beautiful about live, like mixing shows live, right? Is because you can't go back.
Oh, that was the best thing. The best thing about mixing front of house is that, when the last note happened and I hit mute, that day was done and no one's ever going to relive it.
Yep.
It was done.
Unless they're on Nugs TV.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I bet you guys have run into this. I've been the guy who's walking through like a store and you hear a song and you're like,
oh, yeah.
Man, that's pretty cool. That sounds really familiar. Oh, I did that. Okay, maybe that is not bad. Like
I heard one of mine in the Netflix movie the other day, and I was just like, I did that.
Oh. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think one thing that I started doing after years, and I think Pro Tools kind of bought the advent of doing this, and Vance, I'll go into a conversation with you here about this in a second, is when the day of tracking, when you've got it feeling great and everybody's happy, and all of a sudden you move on to 10 other songs and you get to the mix process, and all of a sudden you start rebalancing everything, and it just seems to never capture the vibe. I think a lot of records that I've mixed personally wound up being the tracking day mixing and then just kind of doing some rides. Vance, when Vance did the Stapleton Traveler record, I know that he did roughs every day at the end of the day. And at the end of the record, we got done so quick. We did the majority of the tracking in 6 days. We had a lot of time to mix. We went to another studio to mix on a big Neve console and this and that. And I think Chris really liked the day roughs a lot. So he wound up, whatever overdubs we did, he put them into the tracking roughs. And that wound up being the mix of that album. And I think a lot of times when you get cerebral about making records is when it sucks, And I know that day when Vance was just doing a quick rough at the end of the day, he was just feeling it. And that was the intent because we knew what we were going for that day. I feel like sometimes when you distance yourself and get in the headspace to mix things, it winds up being too thought out and not as heartfelt as the
I've definitely spun my wagon into that circle before. And one of the things that I have set up here is that whenever we're tracking ever, I record the mix, the tracking mix always. And then as we overdub, I record the tracking mix always. As we're constantly recording over and over and over and over and over again. Playlist. So you can usually dig back a ways and find, okay, cool. Well, here on, February 27th, we did this overdub on this track, but on the 26th, here was the original track. Oh, that's actually better, or this part's better, or whatever, the edit was better, whatever.
Well, that's the same thing that Dave was saying. Like, you're not thinking about it. It just feels right. When you start thinking about it, you screw it up. I got busted on. I remember getting busted on a song where they're like, "We don't like the mix, we like the rough mix." I was like, "It's my rough mix."
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, take it, be happy, smile.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that sometimes, but because unfortunately, I know for me, I internalize my mistakes, as we all do. So I internalize the fact that, like, the second chorus, the vocal's not quite as loud as it should be, or the whole mix is a little dark, or whatever. And I just usually have to sort of, like, as Dave knows, speak up and say, hey, give me 1 second to take a look at this. Let me see if I can appropriately for myself agree with all of you by just tweaking things. Now, is this better? Is this better? Is this okay? Is this okay? And in the end, if the artist says, "No, man, that's better," and you're wrong, I'm gonna smile and nod and go, "Okay."
Yeah.
So here's a good question, Dave. You mix, Vance. You mix, I mix. Like, what's your creative reset when you find yourself disappearing up your own ass? When you lose perspective, what do you do to like reset?
When I first started mixing records, I still consider myself a hack engineer. But I noticed when I get in like mix mode and I put the drums up and I put the bass up, then the guitars and I put the vocal in, it usually sucks. But if I start with the vocal and I have the vocal feeling great, and then I start easing everything else like slightly under it, that seems to come together really quick, and all of a sudden things make sense. So another thing I've noticed with mixing is that if I don't start automating or writing things, I think I spend forever EQing. But if I just start writing things, it seems to come together really quick, as opposed to all the time I took, perfectly in EQing things. So my thing, if I'm mixing something, it's usually like, let's just get the vocal, put everything under it, and start doing rides before I start EQing crazy. Because if I start EQing, it's like I've forgotten the intent of the song. By the time I get to rides, I'm tired. I don't want to mess with it, and it becomes homogenized, vanilla music.
What about you, Vance?
I tell you what I do is I will get to a point where I know that I've mixed myself into a corner, and I'll just, if I'm on my desk here or if I'm on a console that has groupers, I just turn the whole thing down. Turn the whole thing down. Now, often what has happened is we've tweaked all of the individual instruments to really great and make them sound good. They just don't sound good in a mix. So I'll just bring up the drum submix first. I'll bring up the bass, get the rhythm feeling good, because I know I know where my vocal gain needs to be. I'll bring up the rhythm parts first, the melody parts, get that, and find that space. I'll turn the vocal up. I'll get the vocal feeling good as a sound, and then I can just basically bring all of those up together, up to where that vocal sort of lives. And so then I can tuck the vocal back into the music if I need to, or above it, or whatever I need to do with it. Being a VCA group or something like that. I totally agree.
I totally agree. One of the hardest lessons that I had to learn was when it wasn't working, instead of just trying to make it work, just shut the faders off and just do it.
We just did this. Dave and I just did this on something. We were on a thing. The artist kept pushing to do something, and I said, "All right, cool, great, this is awesome. I think we're on the right path. Let me start over." Pulled everything down. Done. Pulled everything down.
And you had it together in 10 minutes too.
And had it back together in 10 minutes, literally.
Somebody asked you
those ideas were great ideas. It just,
Somebody asked a really good question here, which I think you guys can probably weigh in on this. Do you use references? That's something that's always gotten me in trouble every time. It ruins mixing for me. Every time I listen to my favorite record compared to what I'm doing, and I just want to turn all the faders off. And I just lose my mind. What about you guys?
I definitely use references, and here's why. A lot of times someone has a really hard time articulating what they're going for as a vibe. It's hard for them to put it into words, but if they say, "Hey, I've really been listening to this song and this really inspires me, and this is kind of like the vibe we were going for," that can explain a lot more to me than them trying to say it in words.
But you can get yourself in a lot of trouble trying to chase the balance of the drums or the vocal sound or whatever. I find that I'm just going down the wrong path and butcher a song, when I try to use a reference every single time. It's never worked out for me,
Well, a
makes
reference makes you just listen to 20 seconds, like 15 seconds. Boom, put it on. Boom, shut it off. Like it's almost like a quick reset.
So I remember doing a mix once where the artist said, "Look, here's my mix reference for this track, or for this record," and he sent me Continuum.
Me too.
I was like, "Cool, that's great." And I just emailed back the name of the engineer that mixed it.
Smart.
And Patrick, and I just said, and here's the guys you need to get to make that record at this studio. Call them.
What are some of the reference mixes you guys do? Like when you listen to tracks, you're like, man, I listen to that to hear my monitors before I start. Reid, what is some of the mixes that you reference just to hear your monitors?
I did a mix a long time ago for a guy named Tommy.
Steely Dan. Sorry.
I did a mix a long time ago for a guy named Tommy Sims called 100, the number 100, and that's how I can immediately know if you're in a strange studio, like what the low end is supposed to sound like and what the vocal is supposed to sound like just from that mix. That's one of my reset references.
I have 2 songs of my own, one Bob Clearmountain. Consoler's a Little Lonely.
Nice.
That record.
Good record. Great record.
Awesome.
Missing Pieces, which is off Blunderbuss. And then Crowded House, Woodface.
I fucking
Any
love that
song
record.
from that record.
4 Seasons in One Day.
4 Seasons in One Day.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of my favorite, it's funny. I first time I ever met Bob. Bob's kind of one of the few, very, very few people I ever sort of like fanboy out on. I kind of germ out and freak out. And actually Reid's been with me when it's happened. I kind of can't really hang out and talk to him because I kind of want to just freak out and run away. But this Crowded House record, it's called Woodface. It's so awesome. The vocals are right here. Yeah. And all the guitars are all the way out there as far as possible in this big soupy reverb. And it's just this beautiful sounding record. And it's fucking awesome. I love that.
And record. The Finn brothers were fighting with each other through the whole
thing. I adore that record. That's the missing Beatles song is 4 Seasons in One Day, honestly.
Yeah. That's unbelievable. I got to see Crowded House a couple years back, and it was, or a few years back, 10 years or 12. And it was really awesome. Just a side note, Crowded House broke up in what American city?
Who knows?
Nashville, Tennessee.
Really?
Right before they played 328 Performance Hall, the night before they played in Atlanta. At that night, their drummer quit the band, flew home. They played in town with the session drummer. I wish I could remember his name. And then that tour was done, and that was the end of Crowded House.
God.
Nashville, Tennessee.
All right, Mark, you can cut us off as we're talking about this, but there was a question that went by earlier that, Dave, I wanted to put to you. And somebody said, so if you're in a home studio and you're cutting drums, like, what advice do you have to what should you do and what should you not do?
God, it's funny because, I think big rooms are amazing and professional studios are amazing. Some of the most fun I've ever had is recording in houses, for sure. And probably most of my career up until the last 4 years ago was cut in the basement or in the back of the house. And I've never felt like that was that ever, prohibited what the sound I could get from a home studio. And I think I like personally small drum rooms. I'm really into booths on drums. And I feel like something with a small booth, the drums just sound right in your face.
Yeah.
You could, I know Vance and I've done records where we've recorded all the drums in a small, tiny booth, and then we reamped into the big room to get the bigger room sound. But something happens in a small room on drums that just sounds huge to me. I feel like there's a lot of control. If it's not treated properly, it can be a nightmare. But
I was going to say drywall is evil.
Drywall is evil unless you're going for In the Air Tonight. Maybe you could get something amazing and big and explosive off that.
That's not what that was. But yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is like with a really dead tiny room, just big enough to fit a drum kit. Those have been the times that I've done things that I've left and be like, oh, I love the drum sound. I know that's a weird thing to say, but again, it's also the velocity of a drummer too. If a drummer's hitting crazy hard, it's not going to sound good.
Well, and that's the thing, man. Like if you're, to the guy who asked that question, if you're recording at home and you're in this tiny room and the drummer's like hitting the drums like beating them like a redheaded stepchild, like there's no possible way you're going to get a vibe.
No, zero. Hitting cymbals loud is a nightmare. Absolute nightmare. Somebody, I saw
that's the balance thing.
Yeah, I saw something a while ago. I thought was pretty clever. Eric Valentine, who's a genius engineer, he did something with, the drummer was hitting really hard, and if you're getting room mic sounds that are back in the room and a drummer's just bashing cymbals, it can wash out the entire drum kit. He had actually taken, a little bit of soundproofing and made these little stands right in front of the cymbals going into the room. So the cymbals were pointing this way. It was about, this big of styrofoam. that basically block the cymbals going into the room, so you could get a big explosive room sound without the drum cymbals just being annoying. And I thought, like, man, that's the thing you just don't learn in a book, and then that's beautiful common sense. I thought the guy was a genius at doing that. It makes so much sense. So a lot of the things that make sense in rooms are really simple, like put tape on it, put a beanbag facing the kick drum, whatever. I mean, it's really
your
simple.
boy Chris Powell turned me on to these hi-hats, these carob hi-hats that are amazing because they're so dark and so dry that when the drummer's just like crushing the hi-hat, they don't go everywhere, and that makes all the difference.
We put tape on the hi-hats a lot of times too. We put big old tape and fucking kill the hi-hat, because that's really a lot of times what ruins the drum sound is the drummer just bashing a hi-hat or bashing a cymbal. So
well, some people talk about recording cymbals separately, but that's really, I mean, that can really fuck a drummer up. You've got to have the right drummer to do that.
Well, that's for pussies.
You know what I'll say about Vance Powell? Vance has amazing ability to make the wrangle drums. It could be recorded in your basement or in a big room, and when he gets done with it, it sounds like Vance. And I think that's the magic of a really great engineer, is they're able to take anything and wrangle it and make it work. So he's smarter and better than me. He can make that work. I have to rely on duct tape and bean bags and pillows.
Well, I mean, I don't always make it right. Trust me. It's it's just it is what it is. But I mean, if there's a kick drum and there's a snare drum and you can get the transients and you can hear it, I'll try to figure out some way to make it work. But I have definitely 100% had tons of tracks sent to me or brought to me. Oh, it's Fab. Sent to me or brought to me that have had way too much hi-hat. And, you just have to figure that out. So, hey, Fab, how's it going?
Hey, guys. Sorry for barging in. I just wanted to, because we're supposed to finish now. So before everybody leaves, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Because that was absolutely fantastic. And this is the kind of stuff that the information that is very difficult to share with people without this kind of format. So we love that this is great, and we love that you guys there with the beards, the longer beards, are going to do it.
Side note, Fab, I wish I had your accent. I would get so much more done in life.
What accent? I don't hear an accent. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, and I wanted to make an announcement. Today is April 7th. And it's the actual birthday of Puremix.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
9 years ago, about this time, we Guillaume, who's the other half of Puremix, pressed play and basically made the server, turned the server on and made the site go live. And I still have the screenshot of the Google Analytics that say 0 visits, 0%, 0 everything, like the original screenshot. That moment when he pressed play, I took the screenshot of Google. And now we have 300,000 members, almost 300,000 members. It's becoming a thing. So I wanted to, share that with the people in the chat room. And thank you so much for being here to celebrate the birthday.
It's an honor.
And Dave, thank you very much for taking time, because these two guys have nothing else to do, but you clearly are busy.
I actually do. I have to do this again here in a minute.
Yeah.
Nice.
So it's awesome.
For me, I want to thank Dave. Thanks, Reid. Thank you, Fab. Thanks for having this platform.
Thanks.
And I look forward to doing this. I mean, I could do this all the time. I wouldn't get any work done, but I don't have any work, so it's kind of okay right now. Let's meet back here again.
Yeah, so guys, everybody out there, next week we're just geeking out. We're not going to do a guest. We're going to do FAQ&A. We're going to do fucking A, geek out shit next week. Just talk about
kick drum questions next week.
Yeah, all the craziness. We can talk about like levels. Like we'll talk about levels and all of that. Shit. We'll have fun.
But
you don't want to know, Dave.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks,
You guys awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you again, Dave.
Thanks,
for
Dave,
coming
man.
on.
Super great.
Appreciate
See
it.
y'all.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Fab, for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you, Mark, back there in the back. For
Yeah,
doing
Mark,
all the
thanks,
hard
man.
work.
Great
Mark's
job.
doing all the hard work. And next week, Between Beards. Between
Google
two beards.
Cobb, Google
Okay.
Sputnik Sound, Google Robot Lemon, Google Puremix, do all that shit.
One tiny thing tomorrow at 2:30, whatever, 6:30 GMT, whatever. It's, I'm a foreigner. I don't understand these measures. It's 8 inches. So tomorrow at the same time, I will be right here interviewing Eduardo Cabra from Calle 13. And he'll be opening the session for Latino America right here, and we'll be able to listen to it and solo stuff, and it's going to be super awesome. So that's
Fantastic.
tomorrow.
All right.
Yes.
See you
Ciao.
later, Fab. See you, everybody. Thanks for
All right,
everything.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Keep it up. Keep doing it.